Welcome back to the Around the World podcast. Today we are going to be finally going through the predictions for the 2024-2025 NBA season. We have all the teams, all 15 teams in each conference ranked 15 to 1 where I have them finishing. Now, time to get into our community question. Nice and simple. What is your bold prediction for the season? It could be a team you think is going to finish high in the conference, low in the conference, a surprise team, a team that you're like, you know what? I think OKC or Minnesota is going to be really good, but I think they're going to be even better. Like, I think they're going to be a 65-win team instead of a 60-win team. Things like that. Let me know what your big prediction, your bold prediction is. Next week or the next time I get to talk to you guys, we'll go ahead and just discuss the award predictions rather than just the teams. And I think then is when I'll pick an NBA champion kind of right at the start of the season, kind of on that first day, next Tuesday, which is crazy to say that we're already that far in. But I think the Olympics definitely helped speed up this offseason quite a bit. We had basketball pretty much the whole time. The finals ended, you had Summer League, and then you went into the Olympics, and then by the time you know it, it's training camp, preseason, and I think some of the trades, like the Julius Randle trade, help keep things nice and fresh. Now, let's get into it, starting first with the West. I'm going to kind of breeze through teams here, otherwise this is going to be like a 2.5 hour episode, and I cannot be doing that. So we're going to go ahead and breeze through teams here. There'll be teams here and there that I talk about a little bit more, or maybe a little bit less, depending on like how important it is. Like obviously the 14 seed out west or out east, I'm probably going to take 30 seconds to a minute to talk about them, and I'm sorry if you're a fan of those teams, but I'm going to talk more about the teams that I think are going to have more of an impact on the season at the upper side of their conferences. Now, starting with the West, like we said, we are going to start first with the 5 teams that I have missing the play-in playoffs completely. Utah, I have at 15. Portland, I have at 14. The Clippers, I have at 13, which we will get into. San Antonio, I have at 12. And Houston, I have at 11. Starting first with Utah, I thought about maybe putting them a little higher, but I don't know. Something about me just like I don't like them this season. They've not been good. Now, obviously, they've kind of punched a little bit above their weight class, but I think it's likely that we potentially see a Lauri Markkanen trade come the deadline. Obviously, he can't be traded like right now since he signed the extension. But I feel like Utah has to trade him. Maybe getting this new contract allowed them to kind of keep going into those trade talks, get more value out of him. But I mean, I just don't see a world in where he's there. I think come the end of the season, or they might try to save him. So now that they extended him, they can then trade him because his value is at an all-time high. He looks phenomenal. He was an all-star a few years ago. I mean, his value is at its peak for sure. The team around him doesn't look awesome. Obviously, you have some pieces here and there. I think they also had a good draft. Cody Williams, Isaiah Collier, I think were for 2 nice pickups. So maybe I'm a little bit regretting putting them at 15, but I mean, somebody has to be here. I wouldn't like any of these teams in the bottom 5 at 15. I would feel weird about any of them. But I mean, 15 and 14 with Utah and Portland, it's pretty self-explanatory. I think they're going to be the bottom 2, whichever way you shape it up to be. Yeah, so 14 then is Portland. These are the 2 teams I have at the bottom. Similar story for Portland. I think they have players that are going to have value. Anthony Simons, Scoot Henderson obviously isn't going to be moved. Donovan Clingan got picked up, obviously. But their window just isn't, it's not right now. You have guys like Jeremy Grant that can actually be of value to solid teams, playing teams, maybe even playoff teams. And he's stuck on a team right now where, sure, his value's high because he's putting up good numbers because he's playing with a not great team. But, like, for his career, is that what he wants? Like, he's been with the Pistons and the Blazers. Like, he's not really been around a great team. He's had some phenomenal seasons. I think it was 2020. I had him in fantasy, and he was unbelievable for the Pistons that year. But I think it's time that I think they're going to move on from him. I think it's likely somebody gets traded, maybe an Anthony Simons, moves on, and they just continue to try to develop. Clingan, they have a bunch of centers with Duop Reith, Ayton, and now Clingan. So I think maybe one of those guys gets traded. It's just going to be a long season for them. You're in the midst of a rebuild, and I hope that they just pick a direction. I don't want them to get stuck in the Jazz cycle where it's like we have some good players, like maybe Jordan Clarkson or Lauri Markkanen, that the Jazz have, but we can't get rid of them, or we're too scared to maybe give them less than their value because we don't have the leverage, and they want to get the absolute maximum value out of it when all they need to do right now is just say, you know what, cut it off, let's rebuild. So yeah, Utah at 15, Portland at 14. Next 3 teams I think are going to be a tier above the Portland and Utahs of the world, although they all are obviously not going to make the playoffs. And this is the one I'm going to take probably the most time explaining out of all these picks in the West, and that is the Clippers at 13. Obviously, a very, very odd offseason for them. The Paul George mistake, I think, well, Paul George leaving, I think, was a mistake, I should say. They definitely had the money to give it to him, and they're in the awkward spot again, like similar to these other teams that are going to be down here, where we're kind of in the midst of rebuilding, but we don't want to commit to a rebuild. And I can't fault, their owner Steve Ballmer and the GM for not making moves to rebuild because they just got a new arena. They want to have fans in there. They want to build up their own side of LA, right? Because it's pretty much been dominated by the Lakers, which no surprise. I mean, the Clippers have one conference finals appearance and no finals appearances ever. So, I mean, how are you going to build up a fan base like that when you have one of the greatest, if not the greatest franchise in basketball as your neighbor? So I'm happy for them that they got to move out, and it makes sense for them to trying to keep being competitive, but I don't think it's going to work out. They clearly made a promise to Harden, and I think that's why they didn't pay Paul George. I think they definitely had something on the table with Harden, like, take a pay cut now, we'll pay you later. So they didn't have the money to pay Paul George. They've got kind of an odd team, an odd assortment of players, some guys that are coming back from, I mean, not only just poor basketball, but genuine like mental things. People like Kai Jones, people like Kevin Porter Jr., things like that. So we'll see how it goes for them. It's just going to be an odd team. It's going to be weird to watch them play, but I think they're going to be okay. But we did just get the news, and this is the reason why I moved him down so far, that Kawhi is out indefinitely. That knee is still bothering him. He didn't play for Team USA. He obviously didn't play in the Summer League, of course. He didn't play in the preseason. I don't know what's going on with him. I really hope the best for Kawhi because I believe I saw someone talk about this. It's almost similar to Derrick Rose, where it's like you had no clue, in 2019. Like that was the last real season we were going to get of such a big, big player in our generation. And it sucks. So I hope he can come back from it. For the Clippers' sake, I hope they can, because the problem has been he's been healthy at the start of the season, but then whether he plays 30 games or plays 70 games like last year, he's still not ready come playoff time. So maybe this will allow him to, keep resting up on that knee, come back playoff time because there's nothing better than playoff Kawhi. But I don't see a world in which this Clippers team is all that good, and it sucks to put him this low, but the 12 teams above him, I mean, the West is stacked. It's a really good conference, so it's hard to put him above some of these teams. These next two teams, I think, are the ones that I can, they definitely could be better than. I wouldn't be shocked if it happens. I'd be more surprised when you get to the play-in teams of, are the Clippers really going to be better than, this team? But these two, I could say, kind of interchangeable. The Clippers could definitely be better than them, and that is the Spurs at 12 and their division rival Houston at 11. Spurs at 12, I think, just for one, great offseason. Stephon Castle, I love the draft pick. He's going to be, I think, a contender for Rookie of the Year. Maybe he's not going to get as much opportunity as a guy like Reed Shepherd, Khalil Ware, those kind of guys, Modest Buzelis. But I think Castle is going to have a phenomenal career in the NBA. I'm excited to see where it goes. He gets the mentor of a couple of solid point guards. Well, I mean, an all-time great in Chris Paul, and then also, Devin Vassell is still there as well. It's a solid young core. I mean, you have a guy who's at some point likely going to be the best player in all of basketball in Victor Wembanyama, a generational talent. It's just not quite there yet. I think we're looking at a potential play-in for San Antonio. Wouldn't surprise me if they make it there. I'd be a little like, a team like maybe Golden State or Sacramento had kind of a little bit of a falling off for San Antonio to leapfrog them, or San Antonio just had a crazy season. But I like the veteran presence they got in the locker room with Harrison Barnes, Chris Paul. I like the youth. Obviously one of the greatest coaches of all time in Greg Popovich. So we'll see how it goes for them. But I think it's another year of being kind of mediocre. Maybe for 3/4 of the season you could be like, oh, we have a chance at the play-in, and then you kind of fall off at the end. Come out. The good thing is you come out with a good draft pick, and you get to continue to build the core through that. Give yourself a chance at getting Cooper Flag. I know it wouldn't really make much sense, but I mean him and Wemby. Unlikely, but if you put yourself in the lottery, there's always a chance that can happen. 11 is Houston. Kind of a similar story. Obviously, they don't have a generational talent. This one is just simply a story of they have a solid team, but they're just, I mean, I think they'd be a play-in team for sure if they were out east, but they're in a tough conference, and the pieces kind of mesh, kind of don't. Like a guy like Jalen Green had a phenomenal second half of the year last year. I mean, if he had the second half of the year that he had last year in the first half, we'd be talking about potential all-star Jalen Green. I mean, he was phenomenal. He's looked great in preseason. I think he just had like a 30-point game the other night or close to it. I'm really excited for him. I hope that he either gets the opportunity to keep going out and doing this, or he gets the opportunity to get traded and maybe build up some value so he can go get himself a big contract in the NBA. Like, say, dumping him off to Brooklyn for X, Y, or Z. Obviously, it wouldn't make sense for a team like Brooklyn because the only person they really have is like Nick Claxton, and Houston already has Sengun. But that type of team, trade him to kind of a lower team, or maybe a team that could get value out of him. Maybe you trade him to a higher up team that's like, hey, we need bench scoring. Like the Wolves last year struggle with bench scoring. Jalen Green, although maybe not the perfect fit for the Wolves' defensive identity for sure, would have given that scoring boost off the bench. So that kind of idea, I think we're definitely looking at the possibility of Jalen Green being traded. We've talked about it for a couple years. I think this might be the year that finally comes to fruition. But that is the bottom 5 teams. Excited for a couple of these teams. I think I'm going to watch San Antonio and Houston quite a lot this year. Houston's always, or the last couple of years, been entertaining, especially last year with Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, Sengun was, honestly, would have been an all-star in pretty much any other year if the West wasn't so stacked at the center and power forward position. I'm excited to watch San Antonio. They're going to be at the top of my league pass teams this year. But, in a stacked conference like this, there's going to be teams that miss. And these are the 5 that I think are going to. Now we move on to the 4 play-in teams out west. A couple of these teams I might talk about a little longer, but I think these first 2 I'm definitely going to run through real quick, and that is Golden State and Sacramento at the 10 and the 9. Golden State at 10, Sacramento at 9. They just really didn't do all that much. Golden State, I think, honestly had an underrated offseason. I thought about it, and I was like, wow, I don't think they really did much. And then I go and I take a look at their Real GM page of their additions and losses, and I'm like, wow, they did pretty good. I just simply think the West is so stacked that it's going to be tough for them to get higher than 10. Steph Curry has looked great. You got Draymond, of course. You still have, those two together. Obviously, the loss of Clay, but honestly, well, if you look at his games with the Mavericks so far, doesn't look that bad. And I really mean this, and I've talked to a couple of my friends and other people that I talk about basketball with, and I've said, I think Clay, if his name was not Klay Thompson, if his name was, say, Buddy Hield, who's now in the Warriors, and you look at the season he had last year, and maybe even the last 2 years, and you say we got rid of him, you'd be ecstatic as a fan. It just hurts because it's Klay Thompson, and he's been there forever and won so many championships with them and was a splash brother and all that sort of stuff. But if you look at the numbers, you can't really fault the Warriors for saying we're not going to pay that money to Klay Thompson. And instead, we're going to go get D'Anthony Melton, Buddy Hield, Kyle Anderson, and really build up a foundation to make another shot. Like, give another effort in this window of Steph Curry and Draymond Green, because there is no clear future after them, right? You still have Kuminga and Podziemski, but are they really going to be like your 1-2 punch in, 4 years when Curry's gone? Probably not. So I think they had a really good offseason given the circumstances. Obviously, it's going to hurt to lose a guy like Klay Thompson, but they did very, very well. And apparently Kyle Anderson can shoot now. So as a Wolves fan, I'm pretty pissed, but obviously going to Golden State's gonna help your shooting, that's for sure. And then, like I said, at 9 we have Sacramento. Just not much movement for them. Can't blame them. They kept Malik Monk. I think that was awesome. Big move for them to be able to keep him. But just not a lot of movement. I think the only thing was Jalen McDaniels from the Raptors. They traded him for Sasha Vechenikov, and then Jalen McDaniels just got traded to the Spurs for nothing. The Spurs are immediately waiving him. So, they got like a second round pick. So, that's pretty much all they did in the offseason from like building up the roster. Obviously, I'm aware of the DeMar DeRozan. Let me make that very clear. I know they got DeMar DeRozan, but from a perspective of building up the rest of the roster, not much. Now, let me not act like the DeMar DeRozan thing didn't happen. That's obviously the biggest part of their offseason. It looked okay. It's looked okay throughout preseason. I'm definitely worried. I don't know the fit, and I've talked about this before. I really am concerned about that. I think the Kings love to play fast. I can't blame them for going to get another offensive weapon. They've been phenomenal offensively for the last couple of years, and that's kind of what's caused this resurgence to them over the last 2 seasons and finally getting to the playoffs and all that sort of stuff. But the defense has really been the problem. Obviously, it's from an on-ball point, it's not phenomenal, but you still have guys like Keon Ellis, Davion Mitchell, and stuff, which I think Davion Mitchell actually might be gone now too, if I'm remembering correctly. So I don't know what to think about this team, man. I think they're going to be a fun watch, that's for sure. I think they're going to be on my League Pass teams to watch, just with how offensive and fast it's going to be, like the Pacers last year almost. But I'm worried about the ability to actually win those high competitive games. Like when you think of the Kings against OKC, the Kings against Denver, I'm kind of like, well, how do they get there? How do they do that? Versus when you think of the Kings versus the bottom teams that we talked about earlier, Houston, San Antonio, you're like, yeah, absolutely, I can see the Kings winning that game. But when you rely so heavily on the offense, if DeMar DeRozan has a bad night, let's say Sabonis has a good night, Fox has an all right night, puts up maybe 22, but DeRozan's just off 3 for 12, 9 points, something like that, how can you expect to compete with a Dallas or a Denver, like I talked about? You just can't. So I think it's going to be a fun watch. There's going to be some awesome plays, probably some really high-scoring, exciting games. But from the perspective of actually getting wins in the NBA, I don't see it translating. Like I said, definitely excited to watch this team, though. And I think the DeMar DeRozan move overall was good. Whether or not it works out, I think it was important for the Kings to be like, yeah, let's not just sit here and be the 10 seed again or whatever they were, the 10 or 9 last year. Like, let's actually go out there and make moves and make an effort to try to be better, even if it doesn't work out. So, fair enough to them. I just don't think it's going to work. On to the other two teams in the play-in that I have meeting, and it is the same teams meeting last year. I have the same 4 teams in the play-in that actually made it in the play-in last year, and that is, I gotta sneeze, and that is the Lakers and the Pelicans. Pelicans at 7, Lakers at 8. For the Lakers, similar story to, obviously, if you exclude the DeMar DeRozan thing, similar story to, say, like a Golden State, even worse, honestly. They just didn't do anything at all. I think Dalton Knecht was a great pick. That's probably one of the biggest value picks in the entire draft in terms of players that, for their position, like obviously drafting the same player that you would at 1 and drafting him at 15 is more value than drafting him at 1. That's what I mean by Dalton Knecht being a value pick. Just had a phenomenal game last night. Was it 35 points, I think, 20 points straight in the fourth quarter. He's going to be a bucket. He's going to be a great guy to have off the bench for any team. I think he's going to have a role kind of like how I see Rob Dillingham being, and I'll talk about that when I get to the Wolves. I'm sorry I'm bringing up the Wolves so much. They're just fresh on my mind. But I think he's going to have a great role. The only problem is they just didn't do anything. I think J.J. Redick was a great coaching signing, especially when you actually watch the Lakers game. There is a real structure to this team now. It isn't just, oh, let's praise Darvin Ham for playing our 5 best guys. It's actually doing something. It's actually running plays, getting open looks, not just saying LeBron, go out there, be our point forward and get looks for these guys, or throw it to Austin Reeves with 8 to go on the shot clock and go get a bucket. They're actually getting structured plays to get these guys open looks. JJ Redick mentioned that he thinks he can find a fix to AD's jump shot. Sure as hell looks like he did. I mean, AD looked phenomenal a night ago as well. Actually, I think he was like 4 for 4 from 3 in the first quarter, if I remember reading that stat line correctly. I mean, it was unbelievable. So if AD can find that jump shot, you can then play 5 out with LeBron, which is an unbelievable advantage. But you actually have structure to this team, finally, and you can start to get value out of those guys off the bench that maybe you kind of see the potential in, but it hasn't come to fruition yet. So excited for them. Just 7 teams above them, I think, are going to be really, really good. It's tough here out west. If any of these teams are out in the East, I think we're looking at high playing teams or even into the playoff 6-5 seed type stuff. 7 is New Orleans. Obviously, the biggest news was the DeJounte Murray trade in the offseason. My worry for them is just simply a center. The depth on the team, the starting 5 is really good. Let's say you start Tice at center, or Wes Missy, one of the two. Your first 4 before you get to the center is DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Zion. I mean, that is ridiculous. That is ridiculously good. So I think they're definitely going to be in the market for a center, especially after losing Valanciunas in the offseason. Very likely they'll get one probably even before the trade deadline, or we see a guy like Brandon Ingram traded for a center. People have talked about Jared Allen being traded for him. I've seen some rumors of that. Don't really know why the Cavs would do it unless you think Evan Mobley can be good at 5, which he has looked good at 5 in the nights that Jared Allen is not there, and he's also developed quite well. But I'm not sure, because then you have the whole problem with exactly the issue that I talked about with Wes Missy, which is he's a center that can't shoot. And when you have a guy like Zion who's so efficient at the rim, you want it to be like LeBron, where you have 5 out. You have shooters around him so that he can get to the paint and dominate, force help, and get open looks for his teammates. With a guy like Wes Missy playing center, Daniel Tice can stretch the floor, but he's not sniping like a Karl-Anthony Towns or a Dirk would be if you had them, like real stretch 5s out there. But I don't know. I'm worried about them for sure, which is why I have them at 7. But the roster on paper, I can't lie, looks absolutely unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Off the bench, you still have guys like Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Jose Alvarado. Um, it's just a solid team. But similar to what I talked about with the Kings, they look fun, they look good. But when you put them against a team like Denver, like OKC, can they actually get it done? Maybe a couple nights throughout the year, but I don't think enough to boost them into those top 6 teams. Unless they make a big trade, like with a guy like Brandon Ingram, for example, to really get that center that they want for that team. And even then, like I said, it's got to be the right one. It's got to be the right center to pair next to Zion. You can't just get any guy and throw him in there. So there you have the 4 playing teams out west: Golden State, Sacramento, LA, and New Orleans. Got to start running through these because we're already 20 minutes deep into this episode. We haven't even gotten to the top 6. We're just about to do that now, and we still have the entire other conference to do. So 6 seed, I have the Memphis Grizzlies. This is an extremely difficult team to try to judge. They were a 50-win team a couple of years ago, multiple times. I think they were the 2 seed back-to-back years. Maybe they're the 3 seed a couple of years ago, but really, really solid team. I think Zach Edey was a phenomenal draft pick, not only because they really did need a big center and a rebounder, because Jaren Jackson is not very good at that, but it also moved Jaren Jackson back to the 4, which is where he won DPOY. So you're getting the defense better. You made a solid draft pick with a guy who so far in the preseason looks great. He is beating up on like actual real centers in the NBA, not just guys in the summer league or, third stringers. He's actually, like, I believe it was last night, he was out there bullying Miles Turner. Like, that is a real center who is a good rim protector. And he took care of business against him. So I think the draft pick was phenomenal. Obviously, getting Ja back is huge. If this team can stay healthy, I mean, the sky is the limit for them. I just simply think staying healthy is a tall ask for this team. We already saw Zach Edey get injured in Summer League. Ja has had a little bit of an injury history over the last 2 years. Obviously, he's done a good job of staying healthy, and when he's been on the court, he's an all-star, one of the best point guards out west. But keeping all 3 of those guys on the court, the big 3 of Bane, Ja, and Jaren Jackson, is already a tall task. Add Zach Edey to that mix, who also has had a little bit injury troubles, although I will say his conditioning is phenomenal. That guy played every minute at Purdue. It gets into that worrisome zone of like, okay, well, they're going to be a good team, and you don't want to see them in the postseason, but can they hold up for 82 games to make a push for a 1 seed? I don't see that this year for them. Definitely excited for Memphis, though. They're also on my list of teams that I think I'm going to watch quite a bit in League Pass this year. 5 seed is, I think, a team that some people probably have significantly lower based on what happened last season, and that's the Phoenix Suns for me. Given the resources they had this offseason, unbelievably good job. Monte Morris, Tyus Jones, love that. Ryan Dunn, love that. They went there and actually filled the holes that they had with the money that they had. They didn't have a lot of money, and they went and got a great bench point guard for a cheap contract. Tyus Jones is going to be great. I think it's important to give it another shot. Like we saw with the Wolves 2 years ago. Rudy Gobert came over. We were, the 8 seed. Well, I think we were the 8 seed, lost the playing game, then won the playing game, made it in, got beaten 5 games by Denver. Everyone was like, oh my God, let's trade Gobert, even though his value's so low. Let's trade Cat. Let's switch some stuff up. And we actually sat there, made a few moves in the offseason here and there, and essentially brought back the same team and ended up being the 3 seed and made it to the conference finals. So I think Phoenix needs to do the same thing. Whether or not it works, we'll have to see. But I think it's important for them to really settle into their roles. Let Bradley Beal realize, yeah, I can go get a bucket, right? I'm a phenomenal scorer, but that's not what this team needs right now. And I think that's a great idea. Let Devin Booker and Kevin Durant be the 2 heads of the snake, and let Bradley Beal not fade off or have to, not score or anything like that. He can still be him when the opportunity comes, but let those 2 guys really be the top, franchise guys. Bradley Beal, you got your money, so it's not like you're fighting for another big contract or to make all-star games or anything like that. Go out there, be the point guard the team needs you to be, or I don't think this is going to happen. Consider going to the bench. Tyus, Booker, Durant, Nurkic, and then Royce O'Neal or Grayson Allen or whatever. Let them do that, and then have Bradley Beal come be a bench scorer for you guys. Not only would it save his legs, and a guy who's had injury history over the last couple of years, save him from being injured maybe a little more, doesn't mean him coming off the bench doesn't mean he doesn't have to play come the final 6 minutes of the game. Right, when you take that timeout with 6-7 minutes left and you put in your final five, Beal can still be in that. Doesn't mean he has to start, and I think it'd be better overall for the team that he doesn't have to start, but obviously he's, $50-60 million man, so that's probably not going to happen. But I do think Phoenix is going to take a step up this year. I've been high on them each of the last few seasons. I have overpredicted them quite a bit over the last couple years. Hopefully this can finally be the year that I'm right on them, but I mean, they are always difficult to predict. You never know if Durant's going to play 40 games, if he can just play 65. You never know if Beal's, now that he's here, if he's going to do the same thing, play 40 games, play 65. So we'll see what happens. I think it's a very, very solid team that made the right moves, the best moves they could have made in the offseason. And now we get into the top four. I'm going to rifle through these ones pretty quick because they're kind of the teams you would expect to be up here. That is Dallas at 4, Denver at 3, Minnesota at 2, and OKC at 1. 4 is Dallas. Great team. They usually overperform in the playoffs compared to what they do in the regular season. That's why I don't have them being the 1 seed or the 2 seed this year. Offseason, I think, was okay. I don't like them losing Derrick Jones Jr. I think he was a good piece. Josh Green, Tim Hardaway. These are foundational pieces of what their role players looked like for a while, so it's going to take some getting used to. And I'm a little worried. I can't lie. I'm a little worried. I think Derrick Jones Jr. was great for them. Josh Green and Tim Hardaway obviously didn't have phenomenal postseasons, but they were great role players for them for a few years, and I think they're going to miss them. We'll see what Dallas can do. Lively, obviously, I'm expecting to take a pretty big leap. He already had a phenomenal rookie year. But overall, I think we're looking at a similar story where it's like Dallas isn't going to be, a top 3 seed, but you see them in the playoffs and you take it lightly, you're going to get mopped off the floor like literally every team did except for the Celtics who won the championship. So at 3, I have Denver. Offseason, kind of odd for them. I think the loss of KCP is one of the most significant role player losses in the entire offseason. It's kind of be swept under the rug. He's a perfect player for the Jokic offense and the Denver offense, and he's gone now. Not only was he a good defender, he was a great three-point shooter. You're replacing that now since Westbrook probably coming off the bench. I just watched the Nuggets play the Wolves yesterday. Christian Brown started. Brown can definitely find that jumper, and I think that's a big piece in his development to find that jumper, but he's not KCP, and he may not ever be KCP. I think the depth isn't as good as you would like coming off the bench. Obviously, Westbrook, Dario Saric is on that bench. Julian Strawther is on that bench. And, unless I'm missing somebody, that's kind of it. Off the bench, obviously the starting 5 is unbelievable. You have Jokic, who's likely going to finish top 3 MVP like he has for, the last 4 or 5 years. But where do they go? Where do they go, and how is this team, who finished second last year and was a game out from finishing third, how do you convince me that they're better than they were last year? Because I think Minnesota is going to be better than they were last year. I think OKC is going to be better than they were last year. So how do you convince me that Denver is going to be able to sneak up to that 60-win mark? Especially when they're in the same division as the Wolves, so they're going to have, I believe, 4 games against the Wolves this year. So it gets a little tough. Obviously, phenomenal team. I'm not gonna sit here and say Denver's bad or anything. These teams are all championship contenders here. This top 4 out west. Any of these guys, if they made the finals, I would not be shocked at all. At the 2, I have Minnesota. At 1, I have OKC. OKC, I'll start with them, and then I'll get into Minnesota. Since I've talked so much about them, I kind of want to breeze through them at the end here. But OKC at the 1. Incredible offseason. Incredible. You literally can't draw it up better. You hit the 2 biggest points you wanted, a 3-and-D defensive guy, and Caruso is one of the best on-ball defenders, if not the best on-ball defender in the NBA, especially guard-wise. You also add a backup center. That was a big problem. Obviously, it's going to suck to have a guy like Jay Will not be able to maybe get as much minutes now. But you have Chet, and now you have Isaiah Hartenstein, who clearly proved to himself for the Knicks last postseason. He can step up and play when the time is there. If Chet gets hurt, or if he has to go play, Hartenstein has to go play 20 minutes, 25 minutes, he can do that. And he can do it at a very high level. This OKC team is terrifying on paper. I can't lie. I'm debating who I want to pick as my champion still. Right now, I'm between OKC and Boston. That's who I have meeting in the finals right now because I just can't see a team from either side getting in there. And I'm really seriously debating putting OKC as the champions this year. I am. Literally everything you could want in a team. Star guard, young players, Scoring threats from the wing, down low, and from three. The mid-range with guys like Jalen Williams and Shea. Incredible defenders in Lou Dort, Alex Caruso. Three-point snipers and guys like Isaiah Joe. Depth. A great coach. They have all the trade pieces in the world with how many draft picks they have. This team is going to be good for a long time. And as a fan of a team who's out west, I'm terrified. I am terrified to see OKC in the regular season. I'm terrified to see them in the playoffs. And I think you are going to have a potential NBA champion here. So OKC fans, you better get real excited. Now we'll quickly hit on Minnesota since I've already talked so much about them. I think the main thing I want to talk about is the Cat trade with them. I have them at 2. The Cat trade I originally hated, obviously because I'm a Wolves fan. He was the longest tenured Wolf. Pretty much every Wolf game that I can remember outside of like the Kevin Love days when I was very, very young. Cat has been a part of those games. The first playoff game since 2004, Cat was there. The first playoff series win, the first ever sweep in our franchise's history, first ever conference finals appearance since 2004, Cat was there for that. So it's tough, similar to the Klay Thompson Golden State thing, to lose him. But I think overall it is unfortunately the right move. Dante DiVincenzo, I think, is honestly potentially a bigger value out of that trade. Having him, if Mike Conley needs to take a night off, which he has for the last couple years, Dante DiVincenzo moving into that starting role fit perfectly. Phenomenal off the bench. A guy that can help Rob Dillingham learn how to be off the bench. Julius Randle, although not as good as Cat as a player, I would just say in general, he's not as good of a shooter. I'm a little worried about that. But overall, great rebounding threat. That was one of the Wolves' problems. Cat would get in foul trouble, and Naz Reid is not a phenomenal rebounder. Gobert is a great rebounder, but he spends a lot of his time contesting shots, getting blocks, being all around the rim, that it results in Cat having to be the guy to get the rebound. So when Cat's in foul trouble, or if Cat can't get the rebound, there's really not anybody else to be there. Julius Randle is a great rebounder, so I'm excited to see him have the potential to juice up the rebounding side, even if the defense takes a little bit of a hit or the three-pointer takes a little bit of a hit. But the main reason is you extended the window for Anthony Edwards. Cat was a max contract guy. I believe the Wolves had 4 max guys: Ant, Gobert, Cat, and Jaden McDaniels. You now get rid of one of those guys. Julius Randle is up for free agency this offseason. I wouldn't be surprised if he leaves to go get a big contract from like a Brooklyn, that type of team. But what you did then is if Julius Randle leaves, well, now you walked out of there with Dante DiVincenzo and $40 million in cap space to go spend and make the team even better. So I'm excited. I'm excited as a Wolves fan. Definitely a little nervous to see how it works. Julius Randle did look solid in the one preseason game that he played. He meshed well. You still have 6 Man of the Year candidate Naz Reid. Very likely could win it again. You have a young up-and-coming guy who could potentially be a 6 Man of the Year candidate in the future in Rob Dillingham. I'm just excited. I'm excited as a Wolves fan. I'll leave it at that. There's not much more to say. I've talked about them so much. But let's go ahead and get into the East. This one I think is going to go a little bit quicker because it's a lot more predictable. I have a couple teams here that you could say I maybe reached on being high or low. There's one team in specific in detail that I'll get into. But starting with the bottom 5 out East, we have Brooklyn in order from 15 to 11. We have Brooklyn, Washington, Chicago, Detroit, and Toronto. The one team there that you guys probably realize already that is not there. I'll get into them later. Let's just breeze past Washington and Brooklyn very fast. Both similar stories. Rebuilding teams, not great. Maybe some trade value pieces. Cam Thomas, Kyle Kuzma, Jordan Poole if he has a good year. Alex Sarr, go win Rookie of the Year. I mean, that's really all I can say for Washington. For Brooklyn, I don't know if there's anything to say. I mean, they're not good. Noah Clowney, go have a good season, pal. Nick Claxton, you got your money, go get traded to a good team. These teams are not good, not going to be competitive. There's going to be some pretty big losing streaks this year. It's going to be a tough season for them. Unfortunate, but that's the reality of a rebuild. Next 3 teams we have, I think, are all in similar situations, maybe even the next 4 or 5 if you get into the teams that I have in the play-in, and that's Chicago, Detroit, and Toronto. For Chicago, I'm glad they made the decision to get rid of DeMar DeRozan, finally make the decision to go in some sort of direction, although they're still kind of stuck in the mediocrity idea where we're not fully rebuilding yet. We still want to be competitive, but we don't want to be too competitive because we're not good enough. It's ridiculous, and I'm sorry if there's any Bulls fans out there because it is brutal. Chicago, I'm excited for Modest Buzelis. He's, I would say, a Rookie of the Year candidate just purely based on what I talked about earlier, opportunity. In a class like this where there's no Victor Wembanyama or, Paolo Banchero, that it's like they're just so clearly going to be better than the rest of the class in year one. It's really going to come down to who's going to, like, the top three candidates are probably going to be the three guys with the most minutes. I don't think anybody's going to have 20 minutes and be up there with, the Alex Sars, Zachary Richeches, Matas Buzelis, who are pretty much going to be starting for these teams at some point in the season at least. So excited for them. Kobe Wyatt, Audasumu keep developing. Vucevic maybe gets moved. Levine maybe gets moved, and you really start to see that rebuild and have at least a fun rebuild. I think the last couple of years for the Bulls has just been a meh rebuild. It's just kind of like, well, we know we're going to finish 9th or 10th or maybe 11th and miss the playoffs, but we know we're not going to do any damage. So it's just not fun. You're just kind of in a stale zone. For the next few teams, though, I think we're both moving in a direction somewhere, which I like, and that's Detroit for one. Good offseason for them. I personally liked it. Finally, although they're not the best shooters in the world, you got shooters around Cade Cunningham. Thank you. Tim Hardaway Jr., obviously very streaky. You have Malik Beasley, obviously very streaky, but you have shooters around him. I think Cade Cunningham is a genuine MIP candidate right now, and when you look at my list, I have a list in my notes of the candidates that I think are going to win awards, MVP, MIP, all that sort of stuff that we're going to do next week. He is my leading favorite in who's going to win Most Improved Player. I don't like Most Improved Player going to guys who are that good, but he genuinely could have that big of a leap. So I'm so excited for him. I can't even explain it. Detroit, I think, is going to be solid. Tobias Harris, I think good to get him at that point. Even if you guys suck, trade him away, and now you got Tobias Harris for free and more cap space to spend next offseason. It's just exciting. Detroit finally has something to be a little bit happy about instead of looking forward to, well, we're going to be the biggest losing streak of all time. You finally have actually something positive to look forward to, even though I don't think it's going to result in a play-in or playoff appearance. 11th is Toronto. Their direction is clearly heading towards rebuilding. A little worried about them because you have such an incredible player in Scotty Barnes, who I think is going to be a all-NBA guy, multiple-time all-NBA guy in the future. But they're kind of stuck. They're almost reaching that Bulls window right now where it's like, well, we still have Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett, Scotty Barnes, enough to not be awful, but not enough to be good. I have them at 11. I hope they consider trading away some of these guys. I really hope they keep Scotty Barnes and try to build around him. But I just don't think right now they're in the situation to be a play-in team, to be honest. And even if they are, they're definitely not winning the series, making it out of the play-in, playing those top teams out east, Philly, New York, Boston, Milwaukee, whoever it is, at the top of the conference this year. All right, moving on to the 4 play-in teams. I have 2 teams that you would say are questionable, like, okay, maybe they'll miss the play-in, and maybe like another team that I had, Toronto, Detroit, could make the play-in instead of them. But then after that, the top 8, I would say, is pretty consensus in whatever order you guys have it in. It's definitely those 8 teams. 10th is the team I have taking the biggest leap, and that is the Charlotte Hornets. For the first time in probably my life, actually, not even in a while, I think in my life, I'm excited for Charlotte Hornet basketball. I truly am. If LaMelo Ball can stay healthy, LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller, I think Josh Green is a great pickup. He's a guy you could look for in MIP. They just have a nice young team. They have Charles Lee coming in, who is a big-time assistant with the Celtics. Tajon Salon, I think, is obviously going to be a project because he's only like 19. And I think they did reach on him a little bit in the draft, but I mean, he's young, so he's going to develop, and you can turn him into kind of whatever player you want to be. I'm excited for the Hornets. I am. I want to see LaMelo Ball go out there and have an all-star year. I want to see Brandon Miller go out there and prove once again that he was the right selection over Scoot Henderson. It's really that simple. There's not much more to it. They're a young team. They're obviously not going to be great, but I think we're starting to look at finally some progress in this very, very long rebuild. And hopefully when they get to the play-in this year, like I'm predicting them to, they don't lose by like 50 like they did a couple of years ago when they played the Pacers. At 9 is the last team before we get to, I think, the consensus top 8, and that is the Atlanta Hawks. I always overreach on the Hawks. I always put them a little bit too high. I think for one of the reasons is just I love Trae Young. But I genuinely am excited for them this year. Lucking into the number 1 pick, obviously great, although you would have loved that to happen, say, last year when you had Wemby on the ballot. But you're never going to complain. You're never going to complain at all getting the number one pick. Richeche, I think, is a great fit next to a guy like Trae Young, who can get him a lot of open looks. Similar to Jean Salon with Charlotte, he is so young. So, I mean, there's a lot of time for Richeche to develop, turn into an all-star guy. I know everybody likes to call him the Orioles number one pick and stuff, but I think he's actually going to be a solid NBA player as he continues to grow. I like putting Atlanta back in the situation where they only have one guy. I think we saw the last couple of years, DeJounte and Trae didn't work together, but when Trae was hurt and it was just DeJounte, or when DeJounte was hurt and it was just Trae, they were significantly better. Obviously, it was a little bit of a fluky conference finals appearance, but the last time they had Trae Young by himself, they made the conference finals. So I think it's going to be tough for them to be higher than what I have them here at 9, but I always love the Hawks. I'm always going to watch the Hawks on League Pass. I love Trae Young, but excited for them. I think I maybe have them a little bit too high here. You could definitely consider putting them at 10 or 11. But I'm excited. I'm excited to see Richeche start to develop. I'm excited to see Atlanta at least have some sort of direction going forward, kind of what I talked about with the teams like Toronto and Detroit down a little bit lower. And now we get into the teams I've been talking about, the consensus top 8. My chair is so loud, I apologize if that's on the mic. At 8, I have the Miami Heat. I feel a little odd about this one, but the 7 teams above them, I'm just like, I don't see a world in which Miami isn't worse than them. Obviously, they're a team that fails to care about the regular season. I think if a guy like Jimmy Butler chooses to play in the regular season, they're pretty comfortably a top 6 team. I mean, there's a reason that every single year they come out and they upset teams in the playoffs, and that's because they're good enough to be one of those seeds. And obviously, they're taking kind of the Clippers approach to it over the last couple of years, which is, well, we'll save you for the postseason when you get there. Well, that makes sense until you're, winning the play-in game and you're going and playing Boston in round 1. And Jimmy Butler's not there. Now what? So, I don't know. I never trust them in the regular season. Kind of how I said Atlanta, I always overpredict. I always underpredict Miami. I correctly predicted them last year to be as low as they were. I think I predicted them at 7 and ended up being the 8th seed. So, I really don't know, man. Miami's such a tough team to predict because of how they do in the regular season. I am excited, as always, though, for Bam Adebayo. I think one of these years he's got to win Depoy, although I think Wemby might have that one on lock for quite some time. Honestly, Wemby might break the record for most defensive player of the years, but Bam Adebayo has just been in an unlucky era where he's with an all-time defender, whether you love him or hate him, and Rudy Gobert. Some phenomenal seasons from guys like Marcus Smart that just couldn't go unnoticed. Jaren Jackson couldn't go on unnoticed. That Bam has just consistently been an all-defensive guy without getting that deep point. But hopefully this can be the year for him. I think Khalil Ware is a sleeper pick for Rookie of the Year, so pay attention to him. But yeah, Miami at the 8, and then at 7, I have the Indiana Pacers. Obviously, going to feel weird since they were just in the conference finals a year ago, but they were the 6th seed a year ago. And I think all the 6 teams above them got slightly better. Even if they stay the same, I think it's going to be tough for Indiana to recreate that success, although they definitely could be better considering Tyrese Halliburton was injured for some time and they hadn't gotten used to Pascal Siakam. So this, I would say, is my riskiest pick out of the bunch. But somebody, and you'll hear the 6 teams above them, one of those teams has to be in the play-in. And so Indiana just happened to be the team that I decided is going to be the one that's going to miss out. I still think they're going to make the playoffs. I don't think there's a world in which Indiana is not in a playoff series, come April next year. But that's what we've got in the plan. Obviously, the numbers with Pascal Siakam and Tyrese Halliburton were phenomenal last year when they were on the court together, especially in the postseason. So I'm excited to see that duo again. Pacers kept pretty much the same team, so you can't really get mad at them. I just don't expect them to be as good, at least in the regular season, be as good as the 6 teams above them. So in the play-in, I had Charlotte, Atlanta, Miami, and Indiana. Now we get to the top 6 teams. You guys are all aware of who at the very least the top 4 are, but let me explain why I have these 2 teams at 5 and 6. At 6, I have Orlando. This is the team I debated putting in the play-in instead of Indiana. I think the KCP signing is honestly underrated. I've talked about how important it was for Denver to lose him. I think it's even more important for Orlando to get him. Not only to get Orlando shooters, because my God, have they needed shooters for a while. They have not been a good offensive team in my lifetime. So they need him. But I think you're also looking at just natural development for guys like Franz, guys like Paulo, Jalen Suggs. It's just naturally, since they're a young team with a lot of draft picks, not a lot of draft picks, but guys who have been drafted, you're just naturally going to see development. They don't need to go out there and, find a Kevin Durant or a Kyrie like the Suns and Nets did a couple years ago. They just need to go out there and let these guys develop because clearly it works. They were the 5 seed last year. The Cavs were the 4 seed, and they took the Cavs to 7 games. Took the Cavs to 7 games, and in Game 7 they barely lost, and Franz was like 1 for 12 or some ridiculous stuff. I can't remember exactly what the stat line was, but it was ridiculous. They had no shooting last year. We're a terrible offense, but the defense is phenomenal. The defense gets even better with KCP. The backcourt of Jalen Suggs and KCP is one of the best defensive backcourts in all of the NBA. So pair that together with a little bit of extra shooting, a little bit of natural development for these guys, and I think I just can't really see them not being a top 6 seed out east. Number 5 is another team I considered putting in the plan, but with just the talent they have and now a new coach, I couldn't leave them out, and that's the Cleveland Cavaliers at 5. I am so excited. Kenny Atkinson coming in as a coach, I think, was a great decision. Moving on from Bickerstaff, clearly something there wasn't working. There's obviously trade potential here this year for a guy like Jared Allen. We talked about the Brandon Ingram potential trade, and putting Mobley at the 5 doesn't look bad at all. He's looked much better, much more comfortable being at the 5, although it would definitely take some getting used to for him, and he can definitely get better at it. I think he has made significant strides over the last few years, especially if you watch their preseason games. He looks significantly better as the 5-man. This team is just good. They're going to be consistently good. It's just going to be a matter of, can we finally put it together, for one season where we get it to the playoffs. Maybe we make a conference finals appearance. They've had health problems. They just simply have been good, not great. And I think we're looking for more of the same here. Obviously, I hope they do phenomenal. I love Donovan Mitchell personally. I think one of the next jerseys I'm going to get, I already have a Donovan Mitchell Jazz jersey. I think I'm going to get a Cleveland one of his now that he's re-signed. But I think it's just tough to be good out east when you have these juggernauts in the top 4. And those juggernauts are in order from 4 to 1. Milwaukee, the Sixers, New York, and then Boston as the 1 seed out east. Milwaukee, I think, is the worst of the 4. Offseason wasn't phenomenal. They got Gary Trent. I would say that's probably the biggest move. Dame and Giannis didn't work out this offseason. That's a pretty big deal when your 2 best players who didn't mesh amazingly well didn't work out in the offseason. Granted, some of that also just had to do with the fact that Giannis was in the Olympics. It's hard. It's really difficult for me to say, yeah, no, they're going to be better than Philly. They're going to be better than the Knicks. Not to mention the injury history that they've had over the last couple of years with Giannis, or at least last year with Giannis towards the end of the year, not being in the playoffs, and really the last couple of years he hasn't been healthy come playoff time, and also Dame having some injury history there as well. Good team. I think, obviously, similar to what I mentioned with a team like Dallas, you absolutely would hate to see Milwaukee in the postseason, especially if they are healthy. Chris Middleton, Giannis, Dame is a terrifying big 3, but I don't think terrifying big 3 in the regular season. So I have them at 4, and that's not because they're bad. It's just simply because these top 3 out east are ridiculous. And number 3 is the Philadelphia 76ers. Kind of similar story to why Milwaukee is below these 3. I think Philadelphia is great, just not quite as good as New York and Boston are going to be. Philadelphia made some great moves in the offseason. Paul George, although maybe not, the same player he was, not even maybe, he's definitely not the same player he was. I think getting that added guy around Embiid is super important because now if Embiid misses games, he's already talked about not playing back-to-backs for potentially the rest of his career. Letting Embiid sit, you now have Maxey and Paul George instead of just Tyrese Maxey. When you have those games, I think anybody would agree that Paul George was a massive upgrade over Tobias Harris, who I don't think is as bad as people make him out to be, but he certainly is not as good as Paul George. The defense gets better with Paul George. I think the offense gets better with Paul George. The star power gets better. The crowds are going to be more packed. It's going to be more exciting. Tyrese Maxey he got much, much stronger in the offseason. He looks like he's going to be a phenomenal player for a long time. I don't think they're going to be as good as New York and Boston. Hopefully this can finally be the run for Philly. It's just going to be tough, man, because they're likely to get into the conference finals. It's extremely, extremely likely that they're either going to see Boston or New York to go to the conference finals. I think a New York-Philly rematch would be absolutely awesome. That series was great last year. And it's some of the craziest fans in the NBA, some of the biggest names in the NBA in Brunson, Embiid, Paul George. I think the series would be phenomenal. But for Philly, you're going to be really good. But At the end of the day, it's exactly the same conversation that it's been for the last 6 years. Can you finally at least get to the conference finals? Even if you don't make it to the finals, even if you don't win the finals, can you at least go out there and make a conference finals with an MVP? Not even MVP candidate, an MVP in this league. One of the best players in the world. Top two teams now. Honestly, this top four is just all the similar stories where it's like Milwaukee's great, just not good as the best. The next three, Philadelphia's great, just not as good as the next two. New York, great, just not as good as Boston. New York for me, I think had a great offseason. I think I had him in like whatever my highest tier offseason was. And now they added Cat, it's like it's even better. I mean, you're looking at, if you put Cat at the 4, which I do think he's probably going to play 5. If you put Cat at the 4, you're looking at Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Karl-Anthony Towns, Mitchell Robinson starting 5. And you still have Precious Achiuwa, who's looked great off the bench. Josh Hart, who's looked great off the bench. Deuce McBride, looked great off the bench. It's just a great team. Simple as that. I'm really excited to see how Cat works. I am worried maybe about his health with how much Tom Thibodeau likes to play his players. Cat has had some injury history. I don't think he's gone a year without an injury in like the last 3-4 years. Now, obviously not like season-ending injuries, but like, missing 3-4 weeks or missing a month or things like that. So we'll see how his body holds up. We'll also see if he plays center. He's not a very good defensive center, as someone who watched him my whole life. He definitely can get the job done. He's an all right rebounder when he's in the game. But I think foul trouble, especially with the minutes Tom Thibodeau is going to want to play him, is going to be a major, major concern for them. But that shooting is going to be phenomenal for them. It's literally like, we talked about it. It's Julius Randle for Cat in the main deal to trade. So one of the problems was Julius Randle was kind of getting in the way on the offense. Cat is not going to do that. Cat's going to be there, hit some threes. New York fans, I'm going to warn you, you're going to get pretty pissed at Cat. We love him, but man, is he going to have some dumb moments. He's just a great, great player, and you guys are very, very lucky to have him. We'll see how New York does. I think they're going to be a serious contender to go out there and win the Eastern Conference over who I have at 1, which is the Boston Celtics. This team was already so good. They kept literally every player from the championship run, and they've now finally have guys like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, even Al Horford, have the weight of winning a championship off their chest, off their shoulders. It's done. They did it. The pressure is not gone, but it now just becomes motivation of let's not just be a good team. Let's be a great team. Let's be a back-to-back champion. Let's go ahead and make three-peats. Let's be a dynasty. Let's win 3 out of 5. And I think they have a serious chance to do that. The biggest problem was Tatum and Brown would, sometimes here and there, it'd be rarely at the same time, but one of them would kind of drop. We saw Jaylen Brown in that finals against the Warriors take a significant drop. That was when the whole left-hand thing happened. Tatum this finals looked much better. The efficiency, I know, wasn't amazing, but honestly, I think he should have won Finals MVP. He led the team in points, rebounds, assists. I think he also might have led in steals and maybe it wasn't steals and blocks, but he definitely led in points, rebounds, assists. They had 2 candidates for Finals MVP, and now they're both stress-free. They've won the ring. All Jason Tatum wants now is a Finals MVP, and his resume is essentially complete for now, except for an MVP, which is going to be very difficult to win. This team, maybe I have them too high in the regular season. Maybe they start to take the regular season off now that they've won it. But with a coach like Joe Mazzulla, I don't see that happening. Joe Mazzulla is not the coach to just say, let's sit around and come focus playoff time. Let's lock in the whole season. You're going to play all 82 games. You're going to be dialed in all 82 games. Maybe we'll get 2 games of rest when we got the 1 seed locked up, but then you come playoff time, and we're out of there in 16 games as fast as we possibly can. We don't care. We're not extending series. We're not taking any teams lightly. We're mopping the floor with you, and we're moving on. They won the finals in 18 games last year. They won in 4, 1 in 5, 1 in 4, 1 in 5. That's dominance. And that was without having a ring for their 2 best players and their veteran leader in Al Horford. This team is terrifying. Terrifyingly good. Right now, I think I have them over OKC. We'll see how I feel come next week when I make my award predictions. But I think there's a very, very, very real chance that Boston is going to do the two-peat, do the double, and be NBA champions once again. And we have officially reached it. I'll go through my conferences real quick. Once again, out east, 15-1. Brooklyn, Washington, Chicago, Detroit, Toronto. 5 teams missing the playoffs entirely. 4 play-in teams. Charlotte, Atlanta, Miami, Indiana. 6 teams out east that are going directly to the playoffs. Orlando, Cleveland, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, New York, and Boston. Out west, 5 teams missing the playoffs entirely: Utah, Portland, Clippers, San Antonio, and Houston. 4 teams in the play-in: Golden State, Sacramento, the Lakers, and the New Orleans Pelicans. And the 6 teams going directly into the playoffs: Memphis, Phoenix, Dallas, Denver, Minnesota, and OKC. Right now, I have OKC and Boston meeting in the finals, both 1 seeds in their conference. We'll see how I feel come next week, but there you have it. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you guys so much for watching or listening. This has been a long, grueling offseason, but we are 4 days away from the NBA season getting underway when I'm recording this right now. It's going to be even closer by the time it comes out. I am so excited for what's to come this NBA season, not only as a Wolves fan, but as a basketball fan. I'm really excited to see this rookie class. I think they're extremely underappreciated, underrated right now. I think we're going to get a phenomenal battle for MVP, for Rookie of the Year, and I think mainly, honestly, MIP is going to be a big battle as well. Can't explain how excited I am for the season. Next time you guys see me, we'll be talking about award predictions for things like MVP, Sixth Man of the Year, that type of stuff. And very likely that will be during the season. The season may have started at that point, and then we can get into talking about real basketball. No more predictions. We get to actually talk about what we are seeing on our screens or with our eyes. I am so excited. Once again, if you made it to the end, I really do appreciate it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Around the World. If you are over on Spotify, be sure to check out the YouTube. You can see me actually talking to you, or if you're on YouTube, all the episodes are available on Spotify as well. Like I said already 4 or 5 times, thank you guys so much for watching or listening, and I will see you guys in the next episode of Around the World.